The question of whether the United States might invade Venezuela has been gaining traction following reports that U.S. forces have already killed 11 Venezuelans, allegedly members of a cartel, which raises the possibility that we could be witnessing the early sparks of something much larger and potentially far more consequential than a localized operation against drug trafficking, because what sits offshore right now is not a trivial police force, but a formidable naval deployment that includes at least 9 military vessels, among them a cruiser, 3 destroyers, 1 fast attack submarine, 3 ships from a Marine Air-Ground Task Force, and 1 littoral combat ship, joined potentially by auxiliary military sealift command vessels and Coast Guard cutters, which collectively form a striking armada, far more consistent with power projection and expeditionary warfare than the interdiction of cocaine shipments, even if that is the official cover narrative. This armada is centered on ships like the USS Lake Erie, a Ticonderoga-class cruiser armed with Tomahawk cruise missiles capable of delivering 1,000-pound warheads across the entire Venezuelan landmass, joined by amphibious assault ships like the USS Iwa, which, despite being shorter than a full aircraft carrier, can embark Marines aircraft and equipment sufficient to launch large-scale amphibious operations, which raises the obvious question of whether Washington's true objectives lie in destabilizing the Maduro regime, securing influence over Venezuela's vast oil reserves, deterring Russian or Iranian encroachments into the Western Hemisphere, or perhaps even orchestrating a hybrid of all these aims simultaneously. Mainstream media coverage has been curiously muted, with only passing references in White House briefings until former President Trump, who is again in office, let slip on Truth Social that the United States had fired the first shots, igniting speculation that this could be the beginning of a wider conflict that links Venezuela's fate to the broader geopolitical chessboard, stretching from Ukraine and the Middle East to the South China Sea. Just as Afghanistan drew America into a 2-decade war after the original objective of targeting non-state actors blurred into a struggle against the Taliban government, so too could this anti-cartel mission slide into a state-and-state war with Caracas. The doctrinal backdrop is the Monroe Doctrine reborn for the 21st century, with Washington seeking to preempt Russian inroads in the Americas after rumors that Moscow might deploy advanced missile systems like the hypersonics used briefly in Ukraine to Venezuela, which, while not altering the nuclear balance of power, would symbolize a provocative extension of Russian presence into the Western Hemisphere. Exactly the kind of scenario U.S. policymakers have long vowed to prevent, especially now as Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran visibly tighten their strategic alignment, a fact underscored by recent summits in Beijing. Compounding this, Venezuela's cooperation with Iran on drone production has raised alarms, because even though indigenous Venezuelan drones like the Zamora V1 have limited range, if technology transfer from Iran or Russia accelerates, Caracas could field Shet-type drones with 1,600-mile ranges, theoretically allowing strikes on U.S. territory, including Florida, a development that transforms Venezuela from a beleaguered regional authoritarian state into a direct hemispheric threat, thus justifying in Washington's eyes the forward deployment of Tomahawk-equipped warships capable of preemptive strikes on suspected drone factories, a scenario with eerie parallels to U.S. operations against Iranian nuclear and drone facilities earlier this year, which combined B-2 bomber runs with cruise missile barrages. But even as these strategic calculations dominate Washington, another layer complicates the picture: the simmering border dispute between Venezuela and Guyana, where ExxonMobil has unlocked vast offshore oil fields that promise to make Guyana's GDP per capita among the highest in the world. Yet Venezuela has claimed a portion of that territory as its own, holding a referendum in 2023 to ratify popular support for annexation, sparking naval incidents and even gunfire at Guyanese officials, raising the stakes for U.S. intervention given for if Venezuela were to successfully assert control over Guyana soil, while maintaining its stranglehold on its own heavy crude reserves, the largest proven in the world. It would possess a geostrategic energy weapon at a time when Washington is desperate to constrain Russia's war financing through oil revenues. Hence, regime change in Caracas becomes a tantalizing option, though difficult in execution. Since the Marine contingent offshore numbers only 3,000 compared to 27,000 troops used in Panama to oust Manuel Noriega in 1989, suggesting that any plan to remove Maduro hinges less on direct invasion and more on catalyzing a domestic uprising, with U.S. firepower serving as deterrent and backstop, a gamble that assumes Venezuelans, already suffering under sanctions, authoritarian repression, and disputed elections, would seize the moment to rise against a leader widely seen as illegitimate. After international observers judged the 2024 election fraudulent, the strategy would be risky, as uprisings require confidence that foreign support is tangible, yet without foreign support, they rarely succeed, creating a chicken-and-egg dilemma that Washington may now be trying to resolve by visibly deploying its forces as a signal of commitment, while holding out the possibility of a replacement government in exile, recognized by the international community as the rightful victor. In this way, the U.S. could theoretically achieve regime change without boots on the ground, though in practice, Tomahawk's drone strikes and special forces raids might still play decisive roles. Whether this succeeds depends not just on Venezuelans, but on the alignment of external actors, for Russia and China may not sit idly by if Maduro falls especially, since Venezuela has provided Moscow with arms contracts, mineral concessions, and a rare foothold in Latin America, while Beijing views Venezuela as part of its belt and road web. Yet Washington sees equally high stakes, because if sanctions are lifted, following Maduro's ouster, Venezuelan oil could return to global markets, lowering prices, easing inflationary pressure, undercutting Russia's war economy, and strengthening the Western coalition, a cascading set of benefits that explains why Venezuela's fate suddenly matters so much more than narcotics interdiction, why the Iwo Jima floats offshore like a silent threat, and why the phrase, "America first," far from signaling isolationism, has come to mean the unapologetic projection of U.S. military power to secure geopolitical outcomes, echoing the Bush era, but intensified under Trump, who has already ordered strikes in Yemen and Iran. Whether this operation becomes another quagmire like Afghanistan or a swift geopolitical coup like Panama will hinge on the interplay of military might, popular rebellion, and great power rivalry. But either way, what happens next in Venezuela could reshape not just Latin America but the entire architecture of global conflict, energy, and power for decades to come.